Here's why almost everyone is wrong about the Border Patrol shooting in Minneapolis of Alex Pretti. Hey, in today's video, we're going to talk about why basically everybody is wrong about the Border Patrol shooting that happened in Minneapolis where Alex Pretti was killed. If you don't know me yet, my name is Caleb Lee. I'm the #1 bestselling author of Concealed Carry 101. And I'm also the founder of Patriot Training Center, where we teach live gun training courses to people just like you who want to learn how to defend themselves and their loved ones with pistols, rifles, and shotguns. So in this video, we're going to jump into the latest big thing that is super controversial. And this is the Border Patrol shooting of Alex Pretti, where this man was killed. And kind of the implications there, what people get wrong about it, I think, and some high level overview of what actually happened and the facts of what actually happened. And then there's some important Second Amendment considerations there. So, first, let's just start with what happened. So, the first thing I'd like to do is actually start with a key video here to look at. So, I'll just play this and then we'll talk about it real quick. All right, so we have the man who was shot, Alex Pretti, here, and you see him in the brown shirt. I'm going to turn this down just so we can talk over it. There's a Border Patrol agent that is pushing this, I guess it's a woman here or somebody that he knows, out of the way. And then we see him reach in, and then he puts his hand on the agent and he shoves him first. And then that immediately gets him pepper sprayed in the face. And then the agent is trying to take charge of the situation. So that's very, very key to actually this whole situation, because kind of just depending on where you're getting your news from and what political stance you hold, people feel all different types of way about what actually happened here. On the right, this guy was. There's certain people in the administration that have gone so far as to say that this guy was a predetermined like assassin, out there to kill federal agents. And then all the way on the left, of course, it's that all these ICE agents are jackbooted thugs that are, needlessly murdering people in the streets. I don't think either one of those really hold up to scrutiny and logic and reasoning and everything. And let's just look at the facts of what actually happened. So that's what started this. And then the video that's most viral is the actual shooting, which we'll look at next.
Honestly.
And then just to kind of clue in, there's a lot going on here. So we have tons of agents on their feet here. And then two of them are down here on the right, over top of the guy that gets shot, Alex Pretti. And I'm just going to turn this down a little bit. This is after the video that we just saw where he touched the law enforcement agent. He assaulted them essentially under the law, which is important that we'll get to later. Okay, and so then he's shot there. So the rest of this clip goes on, and they kind of replay it a couple times. So I'll go ahead and just play it here so we watch what's happening. They're obviously trying to like restrain him and keep him on the ground. There's multiple agents here, and then this guy that was previously over here dealing with the person on the left, he kind of turns around and he sees that they're struggling with this guy on the ground. And then at some point, the guy in the hat right here with the red hat is leaning over, and he sees the gun that's in Alex's waistband, the person that was shot, and then he removes that gun out of the holster. You can see him going for it right now. And he gets it out of the holster. And then some of the agents are yelling gun. And then a first shot, and then all the agents kind of respond and dogpile in. And there's a lot of shooting, and we can see as they're backing up from the threat, they're all shooting him as he's on the ground. So obviously a very bad outcome, and a man was killed here. So no fun, no fun, no fun. What is important here, or what we can learn from this, is this altercation happened that eventually ended in this man losing his life because essentially he assaulted a police officer. Whether anybody feels it was justified or anything like that, that's what happened. As soon as he put his hands on the the law enforcement officer trying to do his law enforcement duties, the same way as if you're being arrested, if you're fighting back with a police officer, then they are legally allowed to use whatever level of force it takes to win that confrontation. If that ends up with you dying, then you're just going to lose. That's the way that these things work. So I will bring up Andrew Branca. I'm going to play a clip from him. Just to let you guys know, Andrew Branca is the author of The Law of Self-Defense. He's a extremely respected expert in these types of things. What is a lawful self-defense incident? Dealing with both civilians and the police. And he just, he's testified in court cases. He's a lawyer. He actually knows the law. And then more specifically, he knows the law in this particular state in which this happened. So any of the local kind of concerns, he also would know about. So he's an expert in this. And just to kind of put this in context, because I think this really summarizes kind of the situation that we're dealing with here.
Walking away with the gun to secure it from the suspect. But what might have happened
remember, there's a whole bunch of officers involved. They're not all, Ethernet cable to each other's brains. They're all seeing different things. And one officer might have seen the gun and said the word gun, and that might have triggered that first shot by an officer. And then all the other officers begin shooting in response to that initial discharge. That does not make the shooting unlawful. It would be an awful but lawful shooting. So what's required for the shooting to be lawful? The officers have to have a reasonable perception of an imminent threat of unlawful deadly force harm. That's it. If the answer to that is yes, this is a lawful shoot. They're struggling with this gun. If they perceive this guy as being non-compliant with arrest, fighting with officers, as reaching for a weapon, they will have reasonably perceived an imminent threat of unlawful deadly force harm, justifying their use of deadly defensive force. And their perception does not have to be correct. Their perception has to be reasonable. We're not required to make perfect decisions in self-defense. Police, too. We're required to make reasonable decisions in self-defense. If an officer heard a fellow officer shout gun, and officers are allowed to rely on the expertise of training on their fellow officers, they don't personally need to see the threat themselves. If another officer with whom they're working in that event shouts out that the triggering event has been observed by a fellow officer, that's enough for another officer to resort to the use of deadly defensive force. They're allowed to rely on their reasonable perceptions of the other officer's communications and conduct. Happens all the time, because everyone knows the officers have different perspectives or seeing different things at any given time. Every officer does not personally need to see the threat. He has to have a reasonable belief that the threat is present. That can be based on a reliance of what other officers communicate to him. So if one officer shouts gun, all the other officers are going to be prepared to, and some of them will shoot, as appears to be what happened here. When you get in a physical brawl with a bunch of armed law enforcement officers and you have a gun on your person, you're running a serious risk of getting fatally shot in the course of that confrontation. The moment they see that gun, they've reasonably perceived an imminent threat of deadly unlawful force against them, and they'll justifiably respond.
So, I mean, that's just the key point here, right? So, legally, this is cut and dry. Under settled self-defense law, officers are entitled to rely on other fellow officers' reasonable perceptions. And basically, as soon as you start fighting back, they are allowed to continue to escalate that until they win the confrontation. So that could actually end up in you dying. And I would go as far as to say, Andrew's talking about obviously if you have a gun involved, but there are situations where even if you're unarmed, if you're fighting back against an officer trying to arrest you, it is not unreasonable and it would be held up within the law. This is just the way that the world works. You could die and then you'll never get the chance to redeem yourself. So if you're in that situation, do not fight back. Stop struggling. Do not fight the officers, right? It's a pretty simple way to not get yourself shot. This is just the way that these things go. You'll have your day in court. That's the time that you can fight it. You can try to fight it legally later, right? There's no reason to risk your life just because you think you're in the right at the moment of arrest. If you're, especially once hands have gone on to you, like it's beyond the point of no return there. So you want to definitely avoid that. So that's the key point here as far as that. So it's pretty cut and dry as far as the legal ramification. I think what makes this outrageous to a lot of people, or the reason why a lot of people are bothered by it, I'm also bothered by it, is we also have we have reality, which is what this is. Under settled law, every single time that this has happened, just look back at any of these events that become public events, that become a big news story. If you are a suspect, whether that's you or you see like this, on TV, you're just watching a suspect. If they fight back against police officers and they are killed in that altercation, they're going to be found guilty. Like the police officers are going to be found not guilty, right? That's just the way this works. If you fight, you need to fight back in court. That's just your only option if it gets to that point, right? You can't just win a fight against an officer trying to arrest you and then they're like, oh, you won, you get to walk away free. That's not how it works, right? Like the men with the guns and that have the jails are supposed to put the bad people, the people they think are bad people, into jails. And they can't just stop doing that if they lose a fight, right? Then they're just going to bring more people. And like, that's not the way that this works, right? In a whole law and order thing that we're supposed to have. So this is, just the way that it is. So I think that perception between what it actually is, reality right there, if it is what we saw happen, and perceptions about what people wish reality was, which obviously when you do see multiple armed officers all trying to subdue just one person, and then you see one of the officers was able to disarm them and get at least the one gun that they knew about. Of course there could be other weapons on this guy or whatever, but you would think with multiple officers all trying to subdue one man, we would hope that they would risk their lives a little bit more to do everything they could to make it so that it doesn't end with this guy dying. Fair enough, right? I would hope that too. I don't want to see anybody dead, especially not an American citizen, especially not a person that's out there doing what they think is right, regardless of political beliefs or whatever it is. You just don't like to see people be killed, right? We don't like to see people be killed by police officers. So or officers of any type. So I think that that's the cognitive dissonance here, and the reason why this is outrageous to a lot of people is because the perception of what we actually would have hoped happened and what actually happened. But the important thing here is that under settled case, law, the way that the legal system is and the way that the legal system protects you as yourself. Like think about yourself as a civilian defender, right? The reasonable man argument that Andrew's talking about is extremely important. If someone kicks down your door and then runs into your house with a squirt gun, and then you grab your shotgun and you shoot them dead, right? And you go to court for that, you will be found not guilty of self-defense, right? Because a reasonable person would think someone kicking down your door and having a squirt gun is a real gun, right? They're actually there to cause you harm. It's not on you to determine whether that person had a squirt gun, or whether that was a real gun, right? That's kind of like a made up, magnified example, but that's what we're dealing with here, right? Like this is already settled. Like this is the way the legal system works. The officers are going to be found not guilty or, not having any wrongdoing there, right? This is settled case law. So as far as the legal part, we have that. And then the reason why I think a lot of people find it outrageous is like we wish that, certain things would happen and that everything could always be rosy and fairy tales. But in the real world, these are the situations that happen. And I think Andrew stated it perfectly. That was an awful situation, but a lawful situation. So cut and dried, that's what it is right there. Now, all that said, two more things: how to prevent this from happening to you, and the 2A ramifications that we're dealing with here. So again, how to prevent this from happening to you. Do not resist law enforcement in any capacity. So I've been in a situation where I've had to deal with law enforcement and I was carrying concealed, and I was asked if I had any illegal guns or weapons on me. I thought it was interesting how the cop phrased that. And keeping my hands where he could see them, I was in a car, I had them on the steering wheel. I told him that no, I do not have any illegal weapons, but I do have a concealed carry permit and I am carrying that gun. And I didn't reach for it or anything. I told him, it's on my hip over there. I kind of pointed out, get my hands up on the steering wheel and all that, right? And the rest of that interaction, turned out the way it was. And then actually, I was in the right in that situation. If I had lost my cool, which I pretty much wanted to do during the rest of that interaction, which I won't really go into ddetail on, but I was in the right there. However, I knew that that was like at nighttime, being stopped in the car, like knowing I'm armed, knowing it in any way, like fighting back physically with police at the moment on the scene is not going to go well for me, right? So I took my licks, I got the charge, whatever, and then I hired a lawyer, and then I proved my case in court later, because there's literally no way you can win that if you're physically like resisting arrest, right? There's just no possible scenario where that's going to go well for you. That's number one, right? Don't fight back against the police. You're in a lose-lose situation. There's like no way that can go good for you. If you are in the right, swallow your pride, swallow your ego, conflict avoidance, like everything you could think of is applicable to here. And yeah, there's just no way that can go. It's a lose-lose situation. So fight it out in court later. That's the only way that you can win that. So, and then the second part of this, I think that's very important, is the Second Amendment implications of this. Sadly, the Trump administration, a lot of people in the higher places there, the FBI, Patel, some other people in very high up areas of the government, when they've been pressed to comment on this, they're making a big deal out of the fact that that's basically trying to paint this guy as a bad actor because he was carrying a gun, and because he was carrying a gun and he also had 2 loaded magazines. And then they're even going so far as to use basically anti-gunner type language, buzzwords that don't mean anything, but they're meant to scare people into gun control. And that's how they've been traditionally and historically used for years and years and years, calling this guy's gun that he was carrying a high capacity gun, and he had multiple magazines, and saying this, frame it as if you have a gun, then you're already suspect and you're already like some type of criminal, and that he deserved this because he had a gun on him. And then going so far as to say that you can't carry a gun at protests or any of these other types of statements. So both, there's no like blanket federal prohibition against that. Going to protests, I would go armed. There's been plenty of armed protests, like specifically about Second Amendment rights, where everything was fine. And even locally here in this city where this happened, there was no local laws prohibiting this person from carrying a gun. So carrying a gun, it has nothing to do with the way that this situation turned out. This had everything to do with the fact that the suspect fought back, and then this is just where these things go. We've seen in the past where unarmed people have been killed by police, and again, it's the same outrage, it's the same people, the same talking points on both sides. But if you fight back against law enforcement, you're probably going to get killed. That's just the way that it goes, right? It's not going to go good for you. It's a lose-lose situation. So extremely, extremely disappointing. And the people that should know better, and supposedly the most pro Second Amendment administration that we have, and all they're talking about is talking points about the fact that this guy had a gun, and that showed that he was a criminal, or that showed that he was had ill intent, just because he was armed, just because he was carrying 2 loaded magazines. It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. So go armed. That is your natural God-given right to armed self-defense that has been enumerated and preserved in our Second Amendment Constitution that we have here in the United States, and that's a very important part of the United States. And our First Amendment is to go out and protest or do whatever, and grievances, you can air that right. That's why we have a First Amendment. So anytime, I don't think that's the right argument to make, and I think the facts of the case speak for themselves. Like, this is the important thing here is what the guy did and his actions that day, and the obvious and logical consequences of that when you try to fight back against law enforcement, like physically, when they're trying to arrest you. That's just cut and dried. It's a lose-lose situation. The only way you can fight back at that point, if you've gotten to that point in an interaction with law enforcement, is through the court system. You just got to shut up and take it, and survive the confrontation so that you can go and fight it in the courts. It has nothing to do with the fact that this guy was carrying a gun. So yeah, that's very disturbing to me. I don't know. I'm sure I pissed off a lot of people on both the left and the right, but I don't care, because the truth is the truth, and I'd rather just feed it to you right and give you the facts, and we can deal with that. But yeah, leave your comments below. Let me know what you think, and then if you are looking for good gun training, check us out at patriottrainingcenter.com, and I will see you in the next video.